Hello and welcome to Newspeak. I'm Peter Whittle. As usual, I'm very pleased to say joined by our senior fellow and moral historian, Rafe Heydel-Mankoo, and Amy Gallagher of Stand Up to Woke. Although actually, Amy, I keep saying that, but I should say it was the New Culture Forum.
Yeah.
You know, you're on our masthead and everything,
exactly.
Aren't you?
I am now.
Amy Gallagher of the New Culture Forum.
Yes.
Pleased to be with you today. Before we look at the week's news, we've got some locals announcements coming up. Just to add, this past week we had three on consecutive nights, London, Bath and in Nottingham. Big crowds of people and good speakers, great events. Rafe, you've got the lineup.
Yeah, I'll just very quickly run through the rest of the events taking place in October. So do take a note if you are in any of these towns and cities. On Friday, the 11th of October, we'll be in Canterbury for an informal gathering. On Sunday, the 13th of October, we'll be and if you're in Birmingham, do come along because there'll be a trip to the Royal Staffordshire Museum in Lichfield. Monday, the 14th of October in Salisbury. Tuesday, the 15th of October in Newcastle. And then on Saturday, the 19th of October, Southend-on-Sea with Peter Little, who's the local reform candidate. Friday, October the 25th, up in Edinburgh for a themed discussion. And on the 29th of October in Southampton. And then finishing the month on the 30th of October, there'll be a gathering in Canterbury. So if you're in Canterbury, Southampton, Edinburgh, Southend-on-Sea, Newcastle, Salisbury, Birmingham, or Canterbury, do email locals@newcultureforum.org.uk. That's locals@newcultureforum.org.uk, and we'll send you further details.
Thank you very much, Rafe. Really worth going to. And, you know, you're getting a greater and greater choice of places as well now. Rafe, I want to start actually... immigration, yet again, and this is not going to go anywhere very far, is it? Because it's the main issue of our time. Two important milestones this week, or two, should we say, two sets of statistics.
Tombstones rather than milestones.
Yes, tombstones. Quite. There is basically, our population is now at 68.5 million, almost entirely due to migration. And then also illegal migration. We have more illegal migrants than anywhere in Europe. First things first, right? 68.5. Do you think that's accurate?
I think we're at 70 million now. I assume. I mean, look, we're predicted to actually beat Germany and become the largest country in Europe, despite being a much smaller country geographically. But yes, so we don't actually know how many migrants are here because we've stopped doing exit checks, so we don't actually know how many people have left the country, for example. I mean, the Americans have exit checks. Why we don't have it, I don't know. But yes, we now have the fastest growing population we've had since records began, and there's been a massive 1% growth in the population of this country, and it's been fueled for the first time exclusively by migration because more people have died than were born who are resident here. So in its migration from Nigeria, from Zimbabwe, from Pakistan, from Bangladesh, with all of the troubles that brings because you're introducing vast numbers of people, often from culturally incompatible nations. They are primarily low-skilled immigrants, and these are immigrants there are more dependents than applicants for residency here, which is vitally important. I mean, we've just had, as we discussed recently, that the OBR have said that these types of low-skilled immigrants are strangling the economy. By the time they reach state pension age, they cost £150,000 each, costing up to £600,000 by the time that they die in many cases. And it's simply a Ponzi scheme that can't continue. And there seems to be no clear way in which we can get out of this. What it also means, of course, is that according to Migration Watch, in the next 20 years, there'll be 20 million more people in this country, which is equivalent to 18 cities the size of Birmingham, with all the needs for housing and schools and GP appointments, let alone benefits and the care system and so forth. But more fundamentally, of course, it's the fundamental cultural change, and it's the the continued deterioration of our urban centres, increased ghettoisation, the United Kingdom becoming increasingly a united nations, riven with fractious tensions between different communities, social cohesion being eroded, social trust being eroded. And of course, we have to also talk about the fact that at this rate, by the 2050s, we are going to see the white British population becoming an ethnic minority. And to think that the indigenous population of a country of this size can go from being the majority to a minority within the space of a generation, I think is completely unprecedented in European terms. You know, Professor David Coleman, one of the world's top demographers, he forecast that white British would become a minority by 2066. That was based upon immigration figures of 2010, which are half of what they're currently in. This is a dire situation that we're in. And this was all done at the hands of the Conservative Party and of the Labour Party. They are both culpable in this. We must never forgive, we must never forget, as I repeatedly say, and neither of them are fit to govern this country, and none of them have the courage to take the urgent action that is absolutely necessary. And if urgent action isn't taken, then all we are going to be silent witnesses to the long and not so slow death of this island nation, the most successful nation in 1,000 years of our history. And I think it's close to treason, essentially, what's happening.
Yes. We talked about that before and used those terms. The only problem with calling it treason, I don't mean to be too semantical here, is that it requires a belief in the country to be a traitor. And these people, I think, really don't even know what you mean by a nation. It's meaningless to them. By these people, I mean successive governments and the political class. But I absolutely take your point. Interesting, isn't it? If like many schoolboys do, and schoolgirls, take 1066 to be the sort of start of our modern history, that by 2066, we will no longer be. And the urgency is huge, isn't it?
Yeah, I know we talk about these issues sort of week in, week out, but I still find it very hard to take in, particularly when there's more and more statistics coming through. So when there was this recent report about there being over 700,000 illegal migrants in the UK, which amounts to like 1% of the population, I immediately just felt less safe in the country. But I also I almost couldn't take it in. It feels a bit unreal because you can't conceptualize it because it's just a number. But it's devastating what is happening. And these, we're seeing a flurry of statistics coming through. Actually, there was a recent league table, the first of its kind, that was published by the Telegraph about the link between criminality and nationality. And we've never seen this before, but it showed that 27% of foreign nationals are more likely to commit crime than British citizens. And when you broke it down by nationalities, you saw that actually 1 in 50 Albanians in the country are in prison. And you saw how kind of countries like Afghanistan, Sudan, Somalia were on this league table. And then you have to, and that's legal migrants. And you've got this issue with illegal migrants, which there's so many coming in. We saw recently, I think it was this weekend, the highest amount of migrants crossing the channel that we've ever had. I think it was over 900, and some of them passed away. I think 3 or 4 passed away crossing the channel. And this is all happening when we know now that there is no economic argument for migrants or illegal migrants, legal migrants. There's no cultural benefit. There's no, it's affecting our crime statistics are going through. There's no good argument that they're for migration. The only argument that the left has now is a kind of misguided morality. But even with that, I think you can undo that because, as I said, people die in these crossings. And actually we see that if crime is going up and resources are being limited, it's going to affect us all in terms of our quality of life. And is that moral? I would say no. Particularly in relation to kind of violence and sexual assaults towards women, is it moral in that respect? So there's no argument now for any of this. And I think our side of the debate really need to push this through. We now need to, we've won the argument, but we need to get this message through to everyone in this country. And that's what our side should be focusing on. That's what I think.
There's a huge space, isn't there? I mean, as you rightly say, nobody makes the case anymore for mass migration. How can you? I mean, not even the usual suspects make it anymore. And as you say, crime, cultural change, just about everything. And also now, of course, the total collapse of the economic argument. So do you feel like I do that somehow or other there's a sense of urgency amongst not just people like us, but most people, that's not reflected in our political parties or in political class?
We know full well that the average British voter is to the right of the average Conservative MP on immigration. And that tells you all you need to know. But that shows you all that you need to know about where the political pendulum lies in terms of Parliament. And despite the urgency we understand and that our viewers understand about this and the need for drastic action, nothing that's being offered by any of the political parties, and I would include the Reform Party in this, nothing comes close to doing what's needed. The Reform Party are doing the best of the lot, but the Labour Party's plans to reduce immigration, the Tory Party plans to reduce immigration, we're talking about legal immigration here, don't even begin to cut it, and are going to be, the Labour's policies aren't going to do a damn bit of difference to lowering, they want to lower it by 300,000, it's not going to work because for various reasons I don't want to get into right now, but it's just, you just want to pull your hair out and say, at what point are people going to wake up to what's happening in this country? I mean, you're quite right to point out all of the crime statistics, the rise in homophobia and misogyny and anti-Semitism that we're seeing, the increased sectarianism, and you import the world's problems. I mean, my God, Londoners in the East End will be crying out for the days of the craze because they look like the Vienna Boys Choir compared to the gangs that you see now rampaging through London, where London is actually divided up between ethnic. The Kurds are in the north. You've got Bangladeshis and Muslims. You've got the Chinese triads. You've got the Albanians all owning their own sections of this. There's a series on Sky called Gangs of London that goes into all of this. That's the reality we're dealing with. But on the illegal immigration side, Amy's quite right. We had 1,000 coming over in one day. Just imagine that, 1,000 in one day. We had 50,000 came last year illegally over the channel. 50,000 was our total net migration level in any 1 year of the 1980s and 1990s. In fact, last year we had more immigration than the entire decade of the 1990s. As I've said many times, more immigration in the last 25 years than in the last 2,000 years. And so now we have the largest illegal migrant population in Europe. We have double the number in France. For years we were told that, actually, the French take in more than we do. We have double the number in France. We have even more illegal migrants than Germany. I said about 2 or 3 years ago, a French politician said, if you don't want illegal migrants to come, it's not rocket science, make Britain less attractive than France. Yes. Here we are 2-3 years later. This is not difficult stuff. You halve the benefits that are there. You don't allow them into these underground economy. The French are very good at making sure that anyone who's caught employing an illegal migrant or housing them gets penalized properly. We don't do any of that sort of stuff. There are such basic things that could be done that aren't being done, and so we're in this situation now where it's not 1 in 100 as has been reported. It was found out by some surveys that 1 in 100 people in this country is illegal migrants. They spoke also to the border control, who's actually said it's closer to 1 in 50 actually of this country. So somewhere between 1 in 50 and 1 in 100 people in this country is an illegal migrant. This should be the wake-up call that we need for the government to finally take action.
Yeah. And also, of course, there is a situation whereby we take vast bulk of asylum seekers' applications. Compared to Germany, compared to France, something like 3% turned down. Is that right?
Which is why so many come from France over to Britain. We accept so many claims. I mean, I think in relation to the statistic of 750,000 illegal immigrants, there's also alongside that, which isn't included in that, around 250,000 asylum seekers who haven't had their claim accepted or denied yet. And of course, because there's such a huge backlog, there will be a push to want to put through these claims, and it's easier to accept than go through the courts and have someone deported. So there'll be pressure to accept them. So it does just generally bring shame on this country that we are now, worse in Europe for this issue. and that we can't get our act together. And it's just shocking, yeah.
Well, you see, this is the point. Can't get our act together. That's sort of like incompetence,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
I've always said lack of will. I just want to, I think it's a great microcosm, actually, of what we're talking about. Do you know the name Thomas Roberts? He was this young man, 21-year-old, who was murdered by an asylum seeker from Afghan, right? And basically, it then emerged, it was a case just a while ago, it then emerged that this guy, right, who came into the country, came in claiming to be a 14-year-old, right, and was put into a school in Bournemouth. Is it familiar now, right? Put into a school in Bournemouth, carrying a knife around the school, was discovered on the street actually carrying a machete, right? But most importantly of all, somehow or other, he had actually managed to get in, even though he had murdered 2 people in Serbia, right? He said he was 14 years old. He's 18 now, right? Colossal incompetence. Apparently, the coroner decided that this was not systemic, and that therefore there shouldn't have to be any kind of inquiry. Right? Now, to me, the blood is on the hands of the Home Office and the Border Force and all these people. Sorry to sound evangelical, because I find this actually rather moving. Tom Roberts, right? Remember, Tom Roberts is his name, 21. He wanted to be a Marine, right? Now, that's it. What his parents must be feeling, I do not know. But isn't that... What is that? If that's incompetence, then it's criminal incompetence, right?
I don't think it's incompetence.
No.
I think it's willful ignorance,
Yeah.
willful blindness, and a refusal to actually see what other people can see, if not downright complicity in this, and this belief that anybody who comes over here... There's the most insidious thing about the Be Kind Brigade is this idea that anybody who gets into a boat must be a decent, virtuous person, and any idea that they are somehow coming here for an ulterior reason. To come from Albania or to come from, it's not difficult. You just go and you get a £100 EasyJet flight. The fact that you've torn up your papers and have paid somebody £2,000 or £3,000 to cross over tells you that there's more going on here than people fleeing persecution or whatever. In Germany, they're actually voluntarily repatriating people to Afghanistan. People are going to Afghanistan from Germany on holiday. So there is no reason or justification now for what we're seeing in this country. We need to absolutely call it out.
I think
it is.
As well, that you mentioned there that they sort of, what some people now call suicidal empathy, when they see people on the boats. But I think it actually goes a bit beyond that. It's actually a preferred kind of approach, which is to automatically think that the outsider is right and is better than us. That story is always actually going to be championed as opposed to ours, for want of a better expression.
And that carries some kind of moral status that you're sort of humbling yourself in the face of the other, and that has a kind of morality to it. Yeah. I think that's the kind of, that's where it comes from. But I think they're just covering their ears in relation to the just extraordinary evidence that this is destroying people's lives. But they just do not want to hear it. You are seeing some people who are on the kind of more centre-left now making these arguments. But there is just this kind of liberal elite that you saw it in relation to Jenrick's interview on Sky News about English identity, that just discussed in the interviewer's kind of facial expressions towards him that you would dare to think about English people or English identity. There's something so deep in people that it's kind of, they've almost been brainwashed to see a certain group of people as good and a certain group of people as bad, and that it has a superiority or a sophisticated, it's seen as a low sophisticated argument, it's low status argument to point out the downsides of immigration. I think that's what it is.
But in these types of cases that you're talking about, I think it's sort of a masochistic morality.
Yeah.
And I think they know clearly that the views being brought over by these sorts of people are completely illiberal, and these people are the ultimate liberals, and that everything that these people stand for is clearly working against. But it's the same way you never see feminists attacking Islamic patriarchy. You know, that's where patriarchy does deserve to have its term being used. You don't see any of those sort of attacks there, and there's some sort of nihilistic masochism to all of it. And, you know, the people that also were complicit in this are, in terms of this case of Thomas Roberts, are these NGOs, these, you know, the Refugee Council, Amnesty International, all of these, you know, allegedly, you know, bleeding heart organizations. They are the ones who have blood on their hands by constantly frustrating every effort made by the government, along, as you quite rightly said, with actually the Home Office. You know, the Home Office are a fifth column in the heart of our establishment, with the highest approval ratings for asylum applications, far higher than in Sweden or in France or elsewhere. We know now from whistleblowers that they've also actively frustrated the government's attempt to get Rwanda off the ground and so forth. And I think the time has come, we're talking about solutions here, the time has come for us to leave the ECHR. Even Lord Sumption, the very respected former Supreme Court Justice, has said actually now that the ECHR has outgrown its original remit. It's no longer the institution that it once was. We do not need to be part of the ECHR because, you know, if, you know, had the Tories actually repealed Labour's Equalities Act, repealed the Human Rights Act and left the ECHR, we would have had no problem having mass deportations, because that's what we need, the mass deportations of illegal migrants into this country. 1 million of them need to go home. You know, in Germany, they've learned the lesson from allowing in all these Syrian refugees. So in Germany now, any refugee that comes in comes on a temporary visa. Why haven't we instituted that? I mean, this is not difficult things. These aren't difficult things to do. We don't need to be in the ECHR. People always say, well, look, Belarus is not in the ECHR. Do you want to be like Belarus? Well, I'm sorry, Canada, Australia and New Zealand aren't in the ECHR. They're not known for being human rights abusers. You need to get out of the ECHR. You then need to have mass deportations to stop the sorts of things that you're talking about becoming increasingly prevalent.
Yes. Well, quite. It is a desperate situation. One thing that perplexes people, I think, before we move on, is that, as you pointed out at the beginning, the vast bulk of migration now is what used to be called, you know, external to the EU. That was always in the government's control. You know, European Court of Human Rights, whatever, that was always in their control. And that is where the huge, I think the deception is most appalling, is that essentially that is where it's been loosened up so much. Because people aren't really coming from Europe anymore, particularly, or nothing like in the same numbers. But in fact, it's all extra EU.
It's all extra, and also I have to say a lot of the blame for this is what stands with. I'm somebody who has been a Brexiteer since 1992, age of 16, but the hardcore Brexiteers who took Brexit and decided to go for the most extreme form of Brexit bear a lot of the blame for this, because you could have had, you know, Nigel Farage was talking about a Norwegian-style relationship with the EU before we got the victory after the referendum. That would have meant essentially that we had some freedom of movement. I was never opposed to free movement of Europeans. My idea for Brexit was bringing back sovereignty and so forth, and making ourselves rulers of our own laws. But I foresaw this. I thought, you know, actually, this was the worst case scenario would be the one that we've actually ended up in. And actually, I'm sorry to say also, during the referendum campaign, Nigel Farage was saying that the EU is racist for not allowing free movement elsewhere, and that we were going to actually, he said, look, think about all the Indians and others coming in here. So Nigel has his part to play in the current predicament that we now face ourselves in. I think quite clearly having migration from culturally compatible European Christian nations where people can be assimilated within the space of a generation, their children will grow up completely imperceptibly different from anybody else. That was obviously the better solution here, merely retaining our own rights and independence and sovereignty.
Yes. It's interesting, during the Brexit campaign, actually, people were, when they were thinking about immigration, which is why most people, I believe, actually voted for Brexit, they weren't, generally speaking, about Europeans on the whole. They weren't. But as I say, it was always within our power to do what we liked about that, you know, EU or no EU. It's been quite an important thing's happened this week, Amy, which nothing to do with immigration, but it is essentially, I think, something that's going to become a very big issue, and that is that a bill has been introduced by Kim Ledbetter, isn't it? I think Labour MP on assisted dying. And you've written a few things about this, haven't you?
Yeah, so this will go before Parliament this month, I believe, and there'll be a vote on it. I think it's the first vote in a decade on assisted dying, or what some people are calling assisted suicide. And this has been kind of rushed through by Labour. And, you know, I think Keir Starmer recently said that he made a promise to Esther Rantzen, and that's why he wants to push it through, which seems to be a very emotional, misguided reason to push through something that, you know, is literally life or death. I mean, it affects our view on life, on ourselves, on our morality. It's a very serious issue. And whatever side you fall on, I think most people would agree that it needs to be fought through and discussed in a very serious way, and we need to make sure that any concerns people have are dealt with. Esther Rantzen, I should say, is a promoting assisted dying in the UK because she herself has lung cancer, and lung cancer is and terminal lung cancer, which is a very painful death. I think most people can sympathise with those kind of extreme cases where you know you're going to die and you know you're going to be in pain. To me, it's a little bit like the abortion arguments when people have quite extreme examples of maybe a young girl that was raped very badly and would want an abortion. But of course, we've got to be very wary of this because I think for two reasons. One, because in recent years we have seen how our NHS is so incompetent and unable to make wise decisions. We saw it with COVID. We've seen it with the trans stuff and the Tavistock. So I'd be and it's under-resourced and, you know, it's just getting worse in terms of beds and staffing and training. So to bring something like this, which is so serious, into the NHS would be a cause for concern. But I think the second reason that I'd be very wary of bringing this in is how we've seen it played out in other countries. So about 10 years ago, Canada brought in assisted dying, and it was initially for the terminally ill who were in pain, and that was it. And then, as we've seen, there's been mission creep and there's been a slippery slope to allow for people who are in chronic pain but aren't going to die and whose life is deemed to be intolerable. And that is just decided by a doctor. How do you determine whether someone's life is intolerable? It then becomes very subjective. And even in Canada now, there has been a push to allow in people who are experiencing psychological pain, which is deemed to be intolerable. So mental health conditions where somebody has no physical disability or is in no physical pain, but they are just suffering psychologically, which is, of course, entirely subjective. How can somebody decide whether somebody is suffering to a certain degree in their mind? And of course, with mental illness, you're not in your right mind. So most mentally unwell people do feel suicidal and they want a quick end to their suffering. But we don't allow that in this country because we know that can change, of course. So there's all those considerations, and we've seen just some quite shocking examples come out of Canada, and it's not just Canada, it's places in Europe. I think the Netherlands are similar in that there was an example in Canada of a man who was facing homelessness and financial ruin. And he decided to apply for assisted dying. And although you can't use homelessness as a reason, he used the fact that he had chronic back pain and had for a long time as a reason to seek assisted dying. And of course, the doctors how can they decide what level of pain he's in? They don't know what he's experiencing. So it very quickly becomes very subjective. And I think that is the massive concern, particularly in mental health. So if we allow it that it will change over time, and a lot of this ideologies around assisted dying is being spoken about in terms of the rhetoric of rights and human rights. So in Canada, it was being said that assisted dying is a human right, and we're denying disabled people equality if we don't allow them to do this. So what it does is, and as certain disabled activists such as Liz Carr, who's done a recent BBC documentary, has said, that it puts pressure on people who feel like they're a burden in society, whether it's older people or disabled people, to make this decision. So it becomes very scary and very dystopian very quickly. And I think that's what people are so alarmed about.
Yeah, I mean, Canada is always now held up as what can go wrong. I mean, what's
Yeah,
your view
well,
on it, actually?
Well, I mean, Canada is the worst case scenario because a remarkable 3% of deaths in Canada are attributed to voluntary euthanasia, which we have there,
3%.
which amounts to now 9,000 people a year are being euthanized in Canada in this way. That's the sort of that's the doomsday scenario. Look, euthanasia is the issue about which I'm perhaps most conflicted and have wavered because on the very fundamentals, I absolutely can see why somebody who is experiencing extreme pain, who has no quality of life whatsoever, who may be dying in 6 months or a year, and that's going to be a slow, painful death. I can absolutely see why, and my sympathies are there entirely. And I personally have no objection to such a person having assisted suicide. And we should explain the differences here because it's a very complicated subject, and we need to distinguish between voluntary euthanasia and assisted dying and assisted suicide. So assisted dying is when a medical professional will give you the medication which you yourself take. So you are the one who actually is committing suicide, and this is called assisted dying because you are terminally ill. Assisted suicide is where the doctor will give you that medication, but you're not terminally ill. You may have chronic pain, you may have motor neuron disease, for example. You may be trapped, your brain may be alert, you can consent to things, but physically you are trapped within a body that no longer functions, and you may have no quality of life whatsoever. And if I was in that position and I thought I've got 20 years ahead where I literally would not be able to do anything, again, I don't really have an issue with somebody deciding to take that step. But those are all things which you yourself do in terms of killing yourself. But then you get to voluntary euthanasia, when that's where a doctor does that for you. And that's what we now have in Canada. But actually in Switzerland, they've had assisted suicide since 1942, if you can believe it. So that's 80 years. Dignitas there, which of course is very well known, that was founded in 1998. They've only had 4,000 people have been given assisted suicide there since 1998. 400 of them or so from Britain. So actually, whilst Canada has this huge rate of 3%, elsewhere in the world where these things are implemented, actually it does seem to be done very reasonably with very few deaths or so forth. There are various states in America where it's also assisted suicide, but it's the mission creep, and this is the issue. So the legislation here is to go along the Swiss lines, and this would be assisted dying. So you would be actually taking the conscious step of doing it to yourself. But who's to say that in 5 years or 10 years you don't essentially have a phase 2 of this legislation coming in, where it becomes suddenly people who are depressed? Or in Belgium, famously, this girl who basically was severely depressed and was given the right to take her own life and so forth. So this is why I'm conflicted. At its very core, and this current legislation, I personally don't have an issue with, but I'm just so wary of where it could potentially lead us that it does give me pause for second thought.
This is obviously going to be some kind of open vote, isn't it? I mean, I've just been noticing just purely on Twitter that doesn't appear to be a party thing. I mean, it's like a vote of conscience or whatever. But I mean, would you vote for something like this? You presumably would abstain.
I think I just feel so much sympathy for people who are living lives. You have to remember who's in support of this. The people who are most in support of this are the terminally ill. And they surely are the best people to know what's going on and if they want to have an end to their life. We also know from polling that the majority of the public also want this. I mean, in Switzerland, I think 80% of the Swiss population are in favour of this as well. And I'm sorry, I mean, I've had pain in my life, and I can't imagine that pain being lifelong and living through that. I can't imagine not having the capacity to use my body at all. So I have a lot of sympathy for it.
Yeah, no, I'm sympathetic to all those arguments, but I would still vote against it. I think probably because of my background in nursing, I've seen kind of people who are given a prognosis that they're going to die or that they're going to be in pain, and things, miracles happen. I know it sounds kind of sentimental, but things things can change, and doctors aren't always right, and I'd be very wary about it becoming, like I said, people feeling that they have to make this decision, and I wouldn't trust the NHS, as I say, to do this wisely. But of course, I can those extreme examples, I can totally understand it. But I think the balance would be that you'd be sacrificing so much more to help out those small examples that I would be wary of it.
Yeah, I've kind of become more of an absolutist on these sort of things, actually. I just, I sort of have. I mean, I would have taken your approach at one point. But I just was thinking, if you think of, it's kind of, what are the great sort of issues that mark you out as a good liberal, a moral person, right? If you take the past, say, 50 years, right, abortion, right, one. And then you have as well the kind of almost sanctification of every form of sexuality that is not heterosexual. And then you have increasingly assisted dying. What do they all have in common? They're all about the species not going on.
Yeah.
They're all about kind of a form of termination. I mean, this is what, and I found myself in this position where, of course, I've always thought that women, should be able to have abortion and things. But you sort of look at it and think, and also it's the reaction of some people who are pro it, not always the public. When they're cheering and clapping. I mean, there was Ruth Davis, I think, on Twitter this week, said, this is amazing news. Like, how can you even describe this amazing news that this is being introduced? So this is kind of death toll thing.
Oh, no, I agree with all your points, and I've made those points in the past. As I say, this is the one issue where I'm most conflicted about, for all of the reasons that you've both so eloquently said. Ultimately, in the sorts of cases that I'm talking about, to my mind, this is about people, the state, allowing the continued torture of an individual. If somebody is in complete pain, in any other situation, you do what you can to stop that. But if you can't do it, or the continued suffering of somebody to the point where they could literally go sort of mad and deranged because they're literally not able to end their life and they don't have any capability over their bodies. So it comes from pure empathy and pure. I'm imagining myself in that situation because I know that I would want to probably do the same thing were I in that position. But yes, as I said, that comes with all the caveats of where does this end and what sort of ironclad safeguards can you put in there. But I do get sort of hope from the Swiss example and so forth, where it actually has been very restricted. There have been very few deaths there, and it's been going on for 80 years, and the population there, 80% support it. So there are, the Canadian and Belgian ones mustn't cloud our judgment too much, I think.
No, there was actually, you actually pointed it out on Twitter. There was this a clip actually from a documentary, I think, Amy. Wasn't it?
Yeah, it was a documentary on the BBC called Better Off Dead, and it was by the actress Liz Carr, who is disabled, and she is very concerned about this bill because there would be pressure on disabled people to end their lives, and she argues that she enjoys her life even though she's disabled, and she went to Canada, and she was interviewing people, and she spoke to this doctor who effectively kills people or helps them to die, and it was very concerning about the way it was discussed, the triviality in which it was discussed, the kind of smiles and kind of over the top kindness, and this doctor also said how quickly the decision is made sometimes, that when people are desperate to end their life, she will fit them in kind of that evening, and you thought, goodness me, this is something that we really need to think seriously about. People, when there is suffering and they're in pain, physical pain or psychological pain, they will want an end to it very quickly. Of course you do. But, we know that pain can come to an end and it can change. And it was very worrying. And I think there's been quite a kind of big response to it on Twitter and social media because it was shocking. I think Canada, as Rafe said, is such a shocking example. And I guess I would also, another thing to say is I'd be very concerned about this coming in at the timing of this, in that in terms of all the things we talk about on this program, that quality of life is reducing. I think the way we think about life is maybe even changing, that we don't see ourselves as having value so much. And, we are becoming more depressed and more unwell as a nation. So is it that, almost the state has caused us to hate our lives, and then the state will offer us a way out of that life? It seems... I don't know, there's something, I know that sounds maybe a bit hyperbolic, but there's something a bit dystopian about it, that what does this mean for how we think about ourselves and our life and our quality of life? And specifically in relation to mental health, I would be very concerned about this being brought in.
Particularly that woman in that clip, the doctor. She was frightening, I thought, because she was sort of laughing inappropriately, not at the fact, but just, as you say, the triviality of it. It's the sort of thing that, whereas we might all agree on all those moral points we were making, then when you're faced with someone who's a practitioner, it can change you like that. And you sort of think, oh God, that's actually, what kind of a person would want to do? Looking at that woman, she liked the control of it.
Yes, she did.
She liked the control of it.
And
I love my work.
Yeah,
it was almost that, wasn't it?
And she's the one making the decision. It's not even as though it goes, from what I can see in Canada, it's not that it goes before a jury and there's a whole group of people that decide. It's just down to one person, it seems, and that's very worrying as well, the way it's being done. That I think in the extreme cases that Rafe brings up, there could be a way of a series of steps that a lot of people would have to really think hard, a lot of guardrails, a lot of safeguarding in place to make sure that it really was the right decision.
Well, that's how it works in Switzerland.
Yes.
So there's a whole panel you have to go through, and then another doctor level. So it is a very different way of approaching it.
So Switzerland, yes; Canada, no.
Yeah, and of course there's nothing stopping people from going to Switzerland from this country, like Esther Ranson, but then again that becomes a financial class-based thing, so only the rich can afford to go to Switzerland, and the poor then have to stay in their terrible conditions here. So
well, this is going to be a big one, I think, actually. This whole argument, I think, is going to be very big. We are actually going to do some more talking for our exclusive members. So if you'd like to carry on seeing the show, then please do become a member, won't you? It sounds, rather a blackmail-y way of doing it, but anyway, please do. Thank you very much, Amy. Thank you very much, Rafe. And we shall see you next time. Bye. Hello. If you're enjoying the New Culture Forum channel and you believe in our mission, may I invite you to join our membership scheme at the link below or on our website, newcultureforum.org.uk. Our work is more important now than ever, and we have great plans ahead for the future, but we can't do it without your support. From as little as £3 per month, you can help ensure that we continue on our mission. As a member, you'll receive a range of benefits, including access to exclusive content, invitations to our private events, including here at our studios, free copies of our books, and much, much more, including, of course, our famous NCF mug. If you aren't able to become a member, then please help us by clicking this button and subscribing to our channel. It's completely free. Just remember to also click the bell icon so that you can get notifications when we post new videos. Thank you.